those of you who've been coming regularly to our series, you know these guidelines. Mute yourself when you're not speaking, so there's no feedback and so on. You're very welcome to keep your video off. If you would like to turn it on, we welcome it because then we have a sense of community. And as I said before, if you have technical issues, please use chat. Shelby's on there to help. Or sometimes the easiest thing is to step out and come back into the meeting. So our goals is looking at principles reflecting very, very much on your why. Why are we doing assignments and assessments with students? And resourcing. I'd like you to leave today having a bunch of resources you can use when you actually sit down to build your assignments and assessments for students. So we're going to do some analysis of how online and assessments and assignments can foster learning, and then develop some principles to do that. So our agenda is really going through these sort of why, what, how questions. What does it mean to assess? What's our purpose? What kinds of assignments and assessments can we design beyond the usual suspects and usual things that we see? And then some sort of strategies like best practices for designing assignments and assessments. And this is our big question. How do we design assignments that foster knowledge and skills mastery in inclusive and meaningful ways, especially for an online learning audience? And so I'd like to frame online learning and teaching, right? What is the significant difference? Think about this for a minute, between teaching class on the ground and teaching class online, right? Especially when you think of assignments and assessments. And the three things to really keep in mind is instructor availability is incredibly structured in an online space. It's not organic at all, right? In a regular classroom, physically, before class, after class, in between things, students can check in with you about an assignment. It's one of the most frequent questions. So for that presentation thing, do you want, they have so many questions, but you're not able to do that online, not very easily. Instead, you get a lot of emails. Navigation is a thing where everything has to be found and accessed online for students. So that's part of the idea of designing good assignments is how do you help them navigate. And then for online learning, one of the big challenges is self-regulation and attention management. Online feels, one student described it to me as slippery. You don't quite know where you are. So one of the things you see on the little yellow post-it, some of the things we're going to talk about is the big principle of less is more. Keeping it clean, simple, concise, and thinking a lot about process time and feedback turnaround. So are you designing assignments that are formative, that give students time to build something rather than a one-off? And thinking about choice and autonomy when we design for students online, and being careful with how you ask students to collaborate. So this is kind of the big frame that we're going to use as we go through the next few slides. So the first chunk, what does it mean to assess? Everybody does assessments. Why do we assess students? It's really important because when you know your why, it helps you design more intentionally. So use chat and go ahead and type, what are we doing? And really asking about purpose, right? One purpose is I'm measuring something. So I've already got that. But why else? And I'm seeing, yes, Sharonda, you're absolutely right. When they can't look you in the eye, accountability, that speaks to self-management as well. Knowledge check, yes. Keep going to assess understanding. Why else? What are we doing? Think of actions and verbs. What is the actual process we're doing when we say we assess people? What else can anyone think of? And this is a hard one because it seems so obvious. We've done it for the longest possible time. And if you are not teaching, to check teaching effectiveness, yeah. You assess to see whether they have learned and whether you've been effective in helping them learn. Determine if goals are met. Are you free to move on? Absolutely. Re-engagement, yes, that's a big one. Where are the gaps, right? Good. So you notice that these have nuances, they're slightly different, right? So let's take a look. I have some pictures that we want to see in terms of um, purpose. So we can measure something. Where have they got to? You know, what's the temperature? You're kind of gauging, right? You're taking the temperature of learning. Are they are they hot? Are they cold? Right? But then there's this as well that some of you alluded to. Are they learning what is intended or more? Right? To determine if goals are met. So it's like a compass, like you're on a journey, and you want to see whether they're off track, on track, and especially if they're further along. Maybe they're moving so well. I can give them some, additional things so they don't get bored. The metaphor of tasting the soup, it takes time to get mastery of something. So you got to taste as you go along, and that speaks to checking in, determining if the goal is met or maybe not yet met, but what have I got to do in order to meet the goals? Do I need more salt? Do I need more pepper? Um, and one of the biggest things we do is this finding out. Many of you alluded to it, whether your teaching is working, whether they are learning what is intended, whether we have to revise the focus. So much of the way we assign work to students and assess them is what this child is doing. It's an exploration. What can I learn from this? So one of the big things to take with us moving forward, all of these words, but also this big concept that assignments and assessments, what we're doing when we assign work and we assess students, is that we are helping them to learn. So what I'd like you to do now is you've looked at each other's reasons in chat. Feel free to borrow. You've looked at the metaphors I provided. Could you take a moment, 30 seconds or so, and write down, and we're going to come back to this, what is your purpose now when you think about it in this way, when you give students assignments? And if you're not teaching, why do you think you were assessed as a learner? All right, so take a few moments, we'll time it for about a minute, and then we'll go on. Okay. So hang on to your notes, all right? We'll come back to it. But check it against this, for example. So there are many reasons why we've always done it, grading and university requirements to categorize students into ability levels for some reason or other. These are reasons I've seen either in the literature or what people have said. This is interesting. Look at the difference to show them where they're failing, to show them where they're flourishing. And just having a different intention can make a difference. Should we show them where they're flourishing and then find the gaps in learning and find their strengths to boost their competence? There is also the piece of assessment and assignments where we're teaching them how to learn, to understand what they're doing, the metacognition of their learning. So what you want to note right now before we go on is, are any of these things new to you? Perspectives you've thought about before but haven't paid much attention to? Which of these really stand out to you? Those are the ones you want to hang on to and pay attention to. So this is a model that will bring it all together at this point for the why of assessment and assignment. You want to think of two ways of assessing students and creating assignments for them. There is assessment for learning and assessment of learning. So if the goal, the big goal, is to improve learning, and that's what I want to do, then on the left side here, we're doing a lot of formative work, assessment in order to build the learning. So observing, describing the learning, and monitoring progress. Think about it. Is this only the teacher, or can you create assignments where the student is doing this? Like peer review is one. And then the partner to that observing, describing, and monitoring progress is feedback. Do we calibrate how they're doing? We use feedback for us to reflect on our teaching, like someone said on the chat, for them to reflect on how they're doing, for them and for us to make some adjustment. Maybe I need to reteach something, or maybe they need to adjust how they're doing their work in order to move forward. So the whole deal with feedback is to optimize the work, both on the teacher end and the student end. So that's a whole formative process, and that should be the bulk of your assessment and assignment work. And then on this right side is when we assess, it's an assessment of learning. At some point, you want to say, all right, let's just see, have we got to journey's end? Have we met the targets? Have we met our outcomes? And you are doing a mastery level judgment at that point, maybe because you have to report grades, right? And that's a summative process. So keeping these two things in mind will help you design the kind of assessment that you want to do, right? If you're assessing for learning, you want to be thinking about these things on the left. And here's another model, same sort of thing, and this has a lot more to do with the formative side of learning. Take a look at these as I explain them and think which of these connect with why you, so what you wrote in your free write, why you assess students. So there are four big buckets. If you are really assessing to make learning visible for them and for you, then what you're trying to do is create assignments that gauge how well they're doing. It's drafting, outlining, making a proposal, etc. Creating milestones so that your students can see if they're getting somewhere or not. So you're making learning visible with rubrics, etc. If one of your goals is, I want them to be persistent, I don't want them to give up, right? Then you want to design assignments and assessments that provide timely feedback. So again, the idea of process, that balance challenge and ability. You know, you have different ability levels in class, you have different ways of learning. How do you sustain the engagement? So there you're really thinking of the feedback that allows you to adjust the work to help people work at that optimum space between challenge and ability so that they can stretch themselves. So all this is about stretching. If you say, you know, I really want them to get the idea of process and not be so afraid of the correct answer product, then you're going to focus a lot assignments and assessments that focus on the balance between the work we do to get to an outcome, and then you get to nurture growth mindsets, which also speaks to being a lot more engaged with your learning. And then the last bucket is, if one of your goals with assessing and doing assignments with students is to help them metacognize and to learn how to learn, then your assignment design needs to have some element of having them reflect on their learning habits and skills, of having them think about strategy for doing an assignment, not just doing it. And that's going to help develop habits for lifelong learning. So these two models can kind of set the stage for your choice of what am I trying to achieve even before you start designing your assignments and your assessments. So I'm just going to pause for like 30 seconds. If you want to add anything to your free write, Now try to expand it. What is your purpose now in creating assignments and assessments for your students? So I'm going to leave this here so you can think about these ideas and add to your notes. Okay. At this point, I'm going to pause before moving into this section. Does anybody have a thought, a question they want to ask right now? You can speak or you can chat. With this whole question of thinking about the purpose that we have when we set up assignments for students.
Shamini, it's Sharonda. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
I always seem to be challenged with giving students, I want to say real feedback in quotes, but I give assessments and some of them are just so I can foundationally understand that they know the concept so I can move on. So the feedback isn't really deep. It's like, good job, or thanks for sharing. So,
Right.
really plain. Do I need to work on maybe creating more assignments so I can give more in-depth, involved feedback? Or is it okay just to do those, light kinds of feedback?
And that's a great question. And you can see how it speaks to knowing your purpose. So you articulated your purpose there really well. All I want to do is a knowledge check, right? Did they get X? Did they get Y? And so you formulate an assignment and actually articulate that to your student. This is just to check, and even your grading scheme for that will be very minimal. It's just a quick, it's a 1 point thing. It's not weighted much in terms of the final grade because that is a kind of a prerequisite knowledge in order for them to do like the bigger work. So you would just do a check plus check minus. You might say, great, you got it all. And it's almost the kind of thing where you can go back into class and say, right, I looked at that little assignment I had you do or the quiz or whatever. It's all good, but there are 1 or 2 questions everyone was having trouble with. Let me go over that again. And then that's it, right? And you notice that it has so much to do with the purpose. Whereas if you're doing an assignment where they're doing deeper work, and your purpose now is to see how they are synthesizing. Your purpose now is to see how they are making connections or doing an analysis or articulating an argument. Then, of course, your feedback gets a little bit more substantive. So it's just making that distinction. So the quick approach to that is design the smaller, less weighty assignments around the simple knowledge checks. That's a very good way to think about how you do feedback. You don't need deep feedback for everything.
Okay.
My analogy to that is, when you teach something physical, somebody is doing a golf swing or a dance move, and you say, "Yep, you got it." That's all you want to say. And if they don't, then you do a little adjustment. Okay, so let's get into the second piece. We've clarified a little bit about the importance of what. And if you have further questions, we'll have time for it at the end. But let's get into types of assignments and assessments, right? And I put this beyond the usual suspects because we want to think of the usual suspects. We see a lot of this, don't we? These are the kinds of big assessments we do and the kind of big assignments we set for students. Absolutely nothing wrong with this. This is good, but it's not enough, right? For many, many reasons. So what is missing? Right? Think about this for a minute. What is missing when there's no formative work? Who gets left out by these types of assignments and assessments. And what skills and capacities are very hard to develop? You know, what is an important skill you want to assess, to teach? But these assessments don't actually help us do that job. Especially when we return to this. How do we do all of these things, which are really important for learning and for engagement and to make sure everybody is learning, that inclusion piece? These these are very good summative assessments, but they're not very formative. Right? So you want to think about what else is there? And here's a way to think about it. Assignments are one of the most difficult areas of education for both the teacher and the students. They can stretch learning and ensure deep knowledge and skills, or they can block. Right? And part of the reason this happens is because of these different reasons. Diversity in learners. We have classrooms where you have a huge diversity of everything, identities, abilities, disabilities. There's a hidden curriculum of the college, you know, people who know how to do school and others who don't, prior preparation. So you get this huge diversity. You also have a huge diversity of interests and backgrounds and histories, right? And so those big summative things don't always get at all the learners. You also have global classrooms with non-native users of English, with different learning cultures. And then this third piece is really important. How do we design assignments and assessments in an online space that acknowledge the fact that we live and work and teach, learn in a knowledge and information era? So there are many modalities. It's not just reading and writing anymore, not even just speaking. There are multiple modes. There's the combination in multimedia, right? Images, body language. We're critically thinking about these things all the time when we process just plain old news. So we call those multi-literacies. Are you culturally literate? Are you visually literate? Are you textually literate? Are you numerically literate? And there's so much possibility in the way we design our assignments to address number 3. And by doing that, you actually also address number 1 and 2. So assignments need to support all 3 areas in order to support equitable teaching. And the assignments we choose can do the opposite and actually create inequities in learning. So over here in this purple box, you see all the different areas that we can foster just through the ways we design our assignments. So we're back to the question of, but what types of assignments will build communication skills, say visual communication? What kind of assignments will build collaboration or creativity in our students? How do we set up an assignment that it's not just shallow thinking, but real critical thinking? How do we build social responsibility and ethical thinking in a statistics class, right? What kind of assignment will do that? How do we teach the learning how to learn? How do we build meaningfulness and a passion or a caring for the subject, just in the way we set up an assignment? And the caring piece is really interesting because it also speaks to working with a diversity of students and working in a very global way. Faculty member I know had a student hand up an assignment saying, I hope you really read this one. I loved doing it. Right? They came to really care for the subject, and the assignment brought that out in the student. So keeping all of this in mind, Let's try and see what you can think of. List as many types of assignments. Now, you know the usual suspects, right? Paper, presentation, etc. So play around with blogs, forms, blogs, radio show, panel are just some ideas to get your creative juices going. Think of modalities. Writing and speaking are just one or two modalities. What else is there, right? Different ways of communicating. And think of both digital and non-digital, even though we're designing for online space. Ah, okay, I see you get started. Go on then. Literary mapping, physical group project. Write a Wikipedia page. Great, good ideas. What else can anyone think of? Yes, podcast. Yeah, doing an oral history collection. Very nice. Polls, sketch, make your own WordPress blog site. Yeah. So you get the idea that there are these different, we can just call them all text forms. These different forms build different skills. So if you think of some of these things in this purple box, right? These assignments that we see people sharing on the chat can bring out so many of these things, right? And oral history might get people thinking about ethical issues. Pre-assignments, yeah, before you do the main assignment, you can do a lot of small things. Mind mapping is a visual way to really get people thinking critically, absolutely. And so many of these lend themselves to learning how to learn, because when you try and articulate your knowledge in these different ways, you're paying much more attention to your own cognitive process and to your own information construction process. Oh, I got to put it into a mind map. So you become a lot more aware of what it is you're doing. It's not just a stream of words. Great. These are all very good ideas. All right. So thank you for that. Now, when you get the slides, and you will have these slides, you can download this document. Many of the things you shared are there, and many of the things you shared, if they're not here, I will add them to this document. This is a growing piece in PFF. And how I find this helpful is that this kind of a tool, this is one of your resources, gives you categories. So it helps you do a quick design, right? You can just go, okay, I want to do something listening, speaking, and you can go and see what all there is there. And then there'll be new things you're going to think of, because once you think in categories, these small items in the categories will just give you more ideas. So you can generate further ideas based on this, right? If you want to think of like tests and exams, but there are many ways of doing it. If you've never thought about performative, you might want to think about, maybe I can do that, right? Oral histories, you could do a performative version of that. So this is one of your tools, and I'm just going to move on and tell you that this will be available to you. Once you get the slides, you can click on the link and get this tool. Now I want to just share with you a little bit assignments using just what you have in your learning management system. These are just a few, but I hope they give you ideas to generate more creative ways of doing this stuff. And whether you use Canvas or any other LMS, Blackboard or Moodle, two of the very common tools in these LMSs are discussion and pages. So you know how we normally use a discussion, right? Everybody discusses and then we move on. Well, here's a nice assignment. Get your students to go back to a discussion that's completed and review it. They can summarize it, they can trace the themes, they can find connections to a cross topic, and then expand it in a little response statement. So that's kind of a simple idea. So the idea here is, can you reuse stuff that the students are already producing? It's very engaging because they're metacognizing their own ideas, their own discussions, in fact, their own words. You can do paired debate in an online space by assigning different debate discussion topics to different pairs or even small groups, and then have them spend some time debating it, whether it's asynchronous or synchronous, and then don't leave it there. Write a summative response. So at the end of it, what do we think? Right? So that's how you can use a simple discussion tool in LMS to design some kind of assignment, and it allows you to do a lot of formative assessment by just watching what it is they do. Collaborative pages is another one, and here are just 3 ideas. Staged writing. We do this in physical classes a lot, but online you just use a collaborative page. You can use Google Drive or OneDrive or any other wiki, but you might as well just use the pages you have in your LMS. You can make them editable by students. They each have a page, and over the few weeks, they will add pieces of writing or drawing or video, because that's a wonderful thing about designing for online. It doesn't have to only be writing to that page, so the piece of work grows. This is also going to save you a lot of time in grading and giving feedback, because you're giving feedback really quickly to small bits of work as we go, rather than the big thing all the way at the end. Writing exchange is just like not quite peer review. Students each develop a question, and then they write a little bit about it, maybe a thesis with an introduction, and then everybody takes somebody else's page to develop the essay. It gets a lot of conversation going, and again, online, this is the kind of thing easy to facilitate. The other really good online thing you can do in an LMS is resource curation, where students can add resources. Let's say I'm teaching all about water issues in the world in an environmental analysis class. Maybe I set up a page and the assignment is everybody go find 1 or 2 resources connected to the topic, current news. And then the critical thinking and evaluation and information literacy skills they are gaining is they must choose something relevant and valid. They have to figure out the source it comes from to make sure it's not fake news, and then write a short annotation about why it's important and what it is, right? So these are the kinds of assignments you can do using LMS tools, and go from here, right? Now, as I go through, as we get into this section right now where we are moving forward, I'm going to be resourcing you and giving you lots of ideas. So please do jump in to interrupt if you have a question, or pop it into chat. I do have chat up and can see it, and Shelby is also watching chat and can interrupt me to ask a question. Right? Because I'm sharing quite a few resources with you now, and I want you to be thinking about it and thinking how it's going to be useful for you. All right, so let's think. This piece of resourcing is designing. How do you design for inclusion and excellence? Remember this: your availability, the idea of navigation and everything being hard to find, and the idea of self-regulation and focus, attention management. So a big thing to remember is your instructions in online design are going to be a proxy for you. You're not going to be there all the time. And even when you run a live session class, like we're doing now, there is no downtime where students can walk up to you and go, hey, I had a question about this. So clarity, comprehensiveness, and access to all the resources they need. I'm seeing a question. I will get to that in a minute. You need to really, really pay attention. And I do have a method for you called transparent design that is going to, I hope, really help you address clarity, comprehensiveness, and resource access. In addition, for attention management and focus, scaffolding is very important, as are as a compass, giving them success criteria, a rubric as a compass right from the get-go, so they know how to proceed. And having it being very process-based is even more important online, because students need to know you feel very, very far away, as Sharonda said right at the start. You're really not available, even though you are. So if you are checking in to see how they're doing and giving them little bits of feedback, not a lot, but little bit in a timely way, they are much more engaged and focused. All right, I'm going to take a little pause and look at the question from Amin. For stage writing, how would you assess or grade the entries? Right, and that kind of connects, because I wanted to answer it right now. It connects to the process-based thing. Stage writing is a process-based thing. And so as they write, you get the chance to do some, with your compass, do a little bit of course correction. Okay, this is going well. I got to stretch the student. Think also about X and Y. Right, this student is beginning to go off track, and they say, all right, why don't you go look at this resource and let's set up a Zoom call to chat. So it's very small, but it's watchful. Stage writing is watchful feedback. At the end of it all, how you'd like to assess is, you may want to have a grade for the whole thing. But then by then, you don't have to spend a huge amount of time grading because you've been seeing it all the way through. You pretty much know what Clara's work is like, and you can give her a grade. Okay, so here's the method. This is very, very powerful. And at the end of this set of slides, I have a video by the person who came up with this whole thing. And she explains it as well. But essentially, you create assignment sheets. Put it into your Canvas assignment. It's a downloadable page. You speak directly to the student and use relational language, and you provide live links where possible. But the structure of setting up any assignment for your students is telling them, what is it? When is it due? That's what they really want to know first. When's it due? Why are we doing it? Right? So here's your purpose. This is why your purpose is important, but sharing it with your students. You can list, of course, oh, this hits these two outcomes. But you should also give them a purpose beyond just the course outcomes, right? It's going to teach you how to make connections. It's going to teach you how to evaluate sources. Whatever it is, put it down for students, just telling them that. And then the big deal, because this is the proxy for you being around for your students, is the how of doing the assignment. Resource link, submission format, where to submit, and then your success criteria or your review. So at the end of the slides, there's an actual example of this you can download and have a look. But transparent design like this goes a long way in creating successful online learning. Here's a quote from a faculty member. There was a big study done on using transparent assignments, transparent design. And this part of the quote. Just mentioning, by simply mentioning that learning to make observations and hypotheses was part of the key goal and providing a sample, I avoided the vast majority of confused student questions. And this was before, now this was not an online class, by the way. Imagine how much more powerful this is going to be for online teaching and learning. So really, if you walk away with this tool, transparent design, you're going to do so well in your online work. And then finally, last thing I want to go through is this idea of proctored exams. You think again about the purpose of assessments and think about what is wrong with these images. Is it primarily a memory test? Do we have an SLO that says by the end of the course, we'll be able to remember all this information? Who does it exclude? What kind of learners might really struggle here? How is it inequitable? And what is it we're really trying to assess here, right? One thing to remember with this is online, this is really a problem right now because how do you proctor students online? It gets very expensive. There is proctoring software, by the way, that many colleges use, but many colleges are also trying to think of alternatives. So if you want to assess growth and ability to use knowledge and skills and a real mastery, not just memorized regurgitation, then you want to remember that memory is the embodiment of knowledge and skills, and it's best developed through meaningful rehearsal. So if you're focusing on growth and you're focusing on the individual voice, you're going to avoid the problem of cheating, if that is an important thing. So I just want to share some ideas of how you might design alternatives to your closed book exams for online teaching, quizzes that are multiple attempts, individualized questions. Everyone gets a different question to answer. And you can play with these processes. It can be semi-proctored. They have to turn up on Zoom and everybody's doing their work in this 1 hour that we have together. You can do take-home exams, and those can be timed, release, and submission. The exam is available Tuesday morning at 9. It needs to be submitted by Thursday morning at 9. And you have all that time, open book, do what you will. And if you use some of these methods, application, implementation of something, design the problem, then solve it, right? They have to come up with the problem themselves before they solve it. Then you are engaging them in deeper level work, and the tendency to cheat. And there's a lot of research on this. The tendency to cheat actually will come down because there's no need to. It's not high stakes under time conditions and you're being pressured. This is, you have time to review and rehearse and do your best work for your grade. And if you do reflection on learning and use portfolios as well, it's a lot easier to know the student's work so that you can actually tell if this is not actually your work. Can I use these? I wanted to bring this piece to a close by asking the question, so is this also appropriate for on ground? And absolutely yes. What we've been talking about for online is just good pedagogy. It's mindful inclusion of all students and intentional support of success. And if you make it relevant and meaningful, it works for all situations. There is a particular use for online because of the issue of your presence online and the navigation issue. So making sure they know where to get everything. So having an assignment sheet. It's really good for on-ground classes, but online it becomes invaluable because that assignment sheet gives them everything and they don't have to click around in multiple places to find everything they need. This section is just a bunch of tools. You all know, many of you know Bloom's taxonomy, and what I've added is assignment types around Bloom's taxonomy. I'm just going to go through this quickly because I want to be watchful of the time, and I'm happy to hang out and talk some more. This is Fink's taxonomy, newer to some of you, but again, it's a learning taxonomy, and again, I've added the types of assignments that correlate with these different areas of growth for a student. There are many hundreds of these floating around on the internet. I picked this one. It's taken Bloom's taxonomy, and these verbs are very useful because it tells you a little bit about what's my purpose, what is the goal of this assignment. It helps you think about how you can target your assignments to fit these levels of learning. This is a digital taxonomy, so it's Bloom's again, but Churches, the person who invented this, has the whole communication spectrum. So you can think about what skills you are building, and then it's a very helpful list of kinds of digital processes that you can be playing with in designing your assignments. It's a very useful, helpful frame. Universal design for learning. And this is trying to make learning flexible and open and includes all learners. So it's about, and this is very much the whole digital space as well, providing multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, how you present information and how they present information to you, and different ways of action and expression. So all those modalities that you brainstormed in chat earlier, they fall into this framework, which is great. And when you design this way, you're achieving all of these things. You're building choice, autonomy, relevance, multiple competencies, information, self-efficacy, and a lot of higher order thinking. If you've heard of UDL before, sometimes you hear about it in relation to disabilities, but it goes beyond that. It really is about a flexible learning assignment. So when you say, here's a review that you have to do of some article, but you can write it, but you can also put it into a storyboard, or you can do a video response. You're giving students that multiple means of expression. Right? They work to their strengths, but they're also learning different ways of expressing themselves. This is very much coming out of UDL as well, but the whole idea of what are multiliteracies when you live in a complex information age. Do your assignments get into these areas of thought? This is about information processing, right? And do your assignments speak to this? Do your assignments choose from around these different modalities, or are you always stuck at the word level or always stuck at the number level? And do your assignments take into account different contexts, putting it into social, cultural, and global contexts, or temporal, looking at past, present, future? And so this is another tool, a frame that you can, when you sit to design, it can remind you, okay, I'm kind of always doing the one thing, but maybe I should look at a whole kind of a thought process. And what can I do for that? Right? Maybe I should get them to sequence something. And finally, the references and resources, I'll just walk you through it to tell you what's there. Here's the example transparent assignment, that categories of assignment page. And this is a good document that really gets a little bit more into, I only touched on it very briefly, it gets into online exams and its assessments with a lot of research references if you're interested. Some videos, this one is on multiliteracies if you're curious about information age and multiliteracies. This is the author, Marianne Winklemas, who created Transparent Design, talking about it. These are short videos, but very informative. And the founder, one of the co-founders, David Rose, who explains UDL. Right? So what you've had is a big intro, right? This webinar was to talk about our why, to walk away with that, to brainstorm and some of your reasons for assignments and the kinds of assignments you can think of, and then to have some principles and resources. When you get down to doing the work yourself, please make appointments with us. We can help you with the specifics. And the next webinar I want to promote is the final one for the series, and Shelby will close that series for us with this building community in online courses.